Welcome to the Off the Cuff podcast. Today we're lucky enough to have Hannah Shewan Stevens. Hannah is an award-nominated freelance feature journalist and creative who travels full-time as a digital nomad. She specialises in covering sex, relationships, health and travel with a focus on the intersections of disability, trauma, chronic illness, underreported conditions, LGBTQ+ issues and mental health. Hannah is most passionate about shining a spotlight on underreported subject areas like the economic impact of violence against women and girls on survivors. If it makes people uncomfortable, Hannah will start the conversation. Welcome, Hannah.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Great pleasure. So, firstly, can you tell us a bit more about your background and how you ended up in journalism?
Yeah, so I think I was quite lucky that I've only ever wanted to be two things my entire life, a fashion designer and a writer. Once I decided I wanted to be a writer, that was the path I was on. Probably born from the fact that my dad used to read me newspapers as a kid, so I became quite obsessive about news. I started off wanting to be a news journalist, ideally a foreign correspondent. And then unfortunately, my chronic health issues meant that, maybe being in a war zone with chronic pain would maybe not be the best idea. So I moved into press agency journalism, more as a kind of features writer, particularly around real life stories. So I did 4 years producing stories for global publications. And I also used to produce short form documentaries. And then I went freelance and kind of slowly found my niche, which turned out to be disability, health and sex primarily.
And so what drove your interest in covering those areas?
The health stuff, it was definitely driven by the fact that I am disabled and chronically ill myself. While in press agencies, I did produce a lot of amazing work, but I also noticed a very significant trend of what is termed inspiration porn, a term coined by Stella Young. It basically means that we tend to depict disabled people as only worthwhile if they're inspiring to other people. And when I became freelance, I was like, I want to change that. And I decided to invest a lot of my own time and energy in trying to change the depiction of disabled people and chronically ill people in the media. And alongside that, sex and relationships is not something a lot of people are comfortable combining with disabled people. We have a long history of desexualizing that group of our society. So I decided to kind of use that to fold into my niche. And then travel came along because I started traveling full time. And I thought, why not write about it and make some money along the way?
So journalism has changed quite a lot with the rise of social media. Has that changed how you work?
When I started out in journalism, social media was rising alongside my career. So I think my approach to journalism has kind of developed alongside social media. I think particularly when it comes to finding stories, I tap into social media a lot. It's how I understand the topics that are coming up, what needs to be spoken about, what people actually really care about. I do think that there's one aspect of it that I maybe haven't caught up with yet, which is that there's a lot more citizen journalism happening online. There's a lot more people becoming figureheads online. So I think it's something that all of us are going to have to develop alongside of within journalism, that we are kind of leading towards this culture of everyone having a voice and a brand. But I think it's really important that we kind of find the balance between that and making sure that journalism is still objective and well researched and, challenges issues.
And do you feel that there's enough understanding between the intersections of disability, trauma, chronic illness, mental health, and, as you point out, sex?
In short, no. I think there's still a long way to go. I think we still, as a society, operate from a point of view of a lot of stereotypes when it comes to disability, trauma, chronic illness, and mental health, particularly around sex and how that intersects with all of those areas. We've made a lot of progress. We're not back in the 1900s where we're locking disabled people up in institutions. Our media coverage has still got a long way to go in terms of fully understanding how these things intersect. And so does our government in terms of legislating in a way that protects these groups and ensures that those groups are able to thrive and not just survive.
So what would you change if you could? What do you think the government should legislate on?
Oh, so many things. We need more robust protections for disabled people in workplaces because disability rights are probably amongst the newest. Still got a long way to go in terms of making those rights more robust. It's still possible to fire disabled people or chronically ill people just for being themselves. I think we need to have a lot more protection and empowerment that allows disabled people and chronically ill people to work. We're seeing a lot of lip service about getting disabled and chronically ill people back to work with very little practical solutions or legislation that would actually enable that to happen. So I think we've still got a lot of progress to do in that regard. Still don't really talk about disability and chronic illness in schools. Disabled people are the only marginalised group in society that anyone can join at any time. And yet we treat it like it's this kind of alien in the corner that no one wants to talk about.
What do you think would be the key part of the legislation? What do you think would actually improve people practically?
We need to have protections that are actually more enforceable. Under the Equality Act, we are protected, but those things are not always enforceable. It's very hard to protect yourself if you are long-term sick. There's some great examples I think are coming up, which I think will help, like the flexible working bill that could be really beneficial for chronically ill and disabled people, but it's not quite enough to get us over the line. I think we really need to be thinking about how we can reconstruct our society in a way that enables everyone to have flexibility and adaptability, because accessibility doesn't just benefit disabled people. It benefits, working parents, single parents, everyone.
You mentioned earlier on about the work you did as a press journalist. What is the one piece of journalism that you would be most proud to be remembered for?
The thing that jumps to mind immediately, I think, is probably because of what's going on in the media at the moment with discussions about the cuts to the benefits bill. I wrote a in-depth kind of case study-led feature for Metro looking into the fact that disabled people in the UK and in other Western countries don't actually have marriage equality, because when you get married, if you are on claim any benefits, if your partner earns over more than £16,000, you lose access to all of your benefits immediately as soon as you cohabitate or marry your partner. So I did a piece kind of looking into that, exploring how that can make disabled people in particular more vulnerable to domestic violence, because it means that once they're in that partnership, they aren't able to leave, which is why disabled women are nearly 3 times as likely to experience domestic violence. It's almost, I believe, twice as likely for men. So I think that was a piece that I'm really proud of, and I really hope I could be remembered for that. And it's a topic that I am still trying to encourage more publications to discuss. And no two-person household can really survive on £16,000, particularly as disabled people on average spend, I believe it's £955 or more a month due to additional cost of living with disability.
Your work on economic impact of violence against women and girls. So tell us more about this issue.
Yeah, so this was something that I kind of came across. I, like so many other women, have experienced violence and sexual violence in particular, and I have become increasingly exhausted by the attitude around it in terms of trying to get people just to discuss this is like trying to get blood out of a stone. So I was brainstorming about how can we get people to care? And I thought, money. People care about money. People care about the economic impact. And this started because I came across a report that showed that the cost of childhood sexual abuse, contact childhood sexual abuse, has cost the UK economy about £10.1 billion up to the date of April 2019. And domestic abuse alone costs the UK approximately £23 billion a year. And that's costs incurred by the justice system, the health service, housing sector. And that's largely without looking at the economic impact on individuals. So, some of the people I've interviewed for stories I've written have said that they've spent close to 100 grand on trying to recover from the abuse that they've experienced. And they're not able to work as much as they want to. They may not feel as confident to pursue opportunities because of the trauma that they've experienced. So I think the more I dug into it, the more I realised that this is a topic that really needs to be discussed.
As you say, it is something that has really impacted the UK economy, and it's also impacted a lot of individuals as well. So why do you think that it isn't recognised? Why do you think that people don't talk about it as much as they should?
I think it's twofold. It's uncomfortable to put an economic cost to something like this. People don't want to say rape costs this much money, or being a victim of childhood sexual abuse costs this much money. It's uncomfortable, and I get that. And as a survivor of both rape and childhood sexual abuse, it is uncomfortable to put a number to what I've experienced. So I think that's a big factor of it. And I also think it's, down to the classic misogyny. We are still not treating violence against women and girls like the epidemic that it is. We're using a lot of the right buzzwords, but people aren't really comfortable fully addressing it, because typically our approach to violence against women and girls has been to treat the symptoms, not the cause. I'm hoping that the more I talk about it, the more it will encourage people to take it more seriously, because this isn't just a moral issue. This is something that's directly impacting the development of our country and the world.
And women are much less likely to have access to financial institutions or have a bank account.
Exactly.
So does that exacerbate the problem?
Absolutely. And I think, not only that, but we don't focus on financial education for women as much as we do for men. Women are not encouraged to learn about investment. They're not encouraged to learn about how to have long-term financial stability. Women are still the more likely one to stay at home with children when they're young, which means that their pension pot's a lot smaller. So there's so many kind of knock-on effects of this that means that the problem is exacerbated because women aren't able to escape abuse. Women aren't able to recover.
Cards.
Exactly. And they, like they do in so many areas of our society. And I think that affects women from even before abuse happens, during abuse, and then when they're trying to recover from abuse, if they don't have the financial security and independence to do that.
And obviously, women are also trained from a much younger age to take care of others and to be kind. And do you think this means that they're more likely to be in a vulnerable position and open to abuse?
Oh, yeah. We're essentially trained to be people pleasers. We're trained to think about how our actions can best benefit men. We're told boys will be boys, and if a man gets upset, you need to give him space and you need to do this. Or if you become a victim of any sort of violence, it's what did you do? How can you prevent that in the future? Maybe you need to give him the benefit of the doubt. So there's always this socialization and teaching that tells women that you need to just sit down and take it, which makes women far more vulnerable to actually experiencing it, which we're seeing at the moment. I'm sure you've seen some of the discourse around the Netflix show Adolescence. The amount of people who aren't understanding the point of that show and are just being like, oh, well, maybe he didn't do it, or maybe she asked for it and she was mean to him, so he just had an understandable reaction.
With the new government, there has been a lot of change around priorities on the issue of violence against women and girls. Do you think enough is being done to help right the wrongs? Is this enough, or do you think that whilst the Labour government are standing up a lot in Parliament and saying we are going to do something, not enough is yet being done?
We couldn't have a better person leading it. I think Jess Phillips has done brilliant things for women for a long time, and I hope that she will continue to do so. We've introduced new protections for stalking and for other crimes under that umbrella. They've introduced domestic violence specialists in 999 centres. I believe that's only 5 so far in the whole country. My biggest concern is that, like I said earlier, we are still dealing with the symptoms and not the causes. Looking at the government's post they put up for International Women's Day, and they talk about how their plan that they're going to publish in summer will address the behaviours demonstrated by some men and boys. The language is always soft, and they're almost so scared of being told, oh, it's not all men, that they're not willing to actually take the lines we need to address this problem. Violence against women and girls is caused by misogyny in men. Not all men, but it's enough.
And do you think the government is doing enough to deal with violence against women and girls on a cross-departmental level? One of the issues that we deal with at Keystone Consulting is actually violence against women on trains. A third of women feel very unsafe on trains. Do you think enough is being done on a cross-departmental level?
It's a problem we have across all governmental issues, regardless of the topic. We don't work enough as a cross-departmental level looking at how things intersect across travel, across health. The amount of women who've experienced harassment in hospitals or in doctor's surgeries, or the surgeon who's recently given back his license after removing the ovaries of 2 women without their consent. That's violence against women and girls, and we're not looking at this more broadly. I want to see us tackle violence against women and girls in every single subsection of society, and I think the government needs to do better in terms of looking at that.
And if you were one of the ministers within the Justice Department, what would you do to eliminate these issues?
Oh, it's such a big list. My number one is, and will always be my number one, is that we need to improve sex and consent education from as young of age as humanly possible. It's not inappropriate to teach a 2-year-old to say, I don't want to be hugged right now. We need to be empowering parents with that education. We need to be ensuring that children have access to that education from a very young age, boys and girls, so that boys and girls can understand how to interact. I think so often we're dealing with these things by the time that people become adults. It's too late by that point. I think also within that, we need to be looking at combating extremism, particularly misogyny online, with more education in schools. I'm still really disappointed that the government have refused to classify misogyny as a hate crime, because it is, and it's affecting a huge number of women. Support in the justice system. I think that so many women and girls feel that it's pointless to report. I know I did. Numerous incidents that I've experienced, particularly when the news cycle is constantly throwing up how this was used against a woman in a case, or this was used against a woman in a case. I still remember a case from years ago where a woman won her case for the first time, and then the second time on appeal, the only new piece of evidence that was introduced was her sexual history. And the fact that she'd previously had a threesome meant that an incident where she was raped by 2 men meant that that was now consensual. Until we're able to create a safe space for victims, we are not going to see an increase of convictions. We're not going to see women feeling empowered to come forward and actually get the support and the justice that they deserve to get. And improving social care support, actually, because when I was a child and reported, I was essentially told, it's your word against theirs. I would not recommend going forward with this, by a social worker. And there was no support for the family. There was no support to empower us as a family unit to go forward. And this was after he had admitted more than half of the charges to the people who questioned him. And I was still told there's no point going forward. So I think a big thing for me is that we need to improve the support network all the way through to ensure that both the victim and the family and the loved ones around them have the support that enables survivors to get justice.
Absolutely, because it's not just the impact that it has on you, it is the impact that it has on the family. And of course, it's easier to make a better son than it is to make a better husband if you've had all those years of him being taught wrong, essentially.
Exactly.
And what other issues that make women vulnerable do not get the coverage that they should?
Health. I could reel off a million statistics. We're still more likely to die in car accidents. We're still more likely to die of heart attacks. People are less likely to give us CPR because we have boobs. There are so many things that are making women more vulnerable to death. Women are more likely to experience disability, chronic illness, autoimmune disease, and research is still nowhere near catching up in any of those areas. And I think also in the workplace, I think we've kind of got to the point where we think, women have rights in the workplace. So that means that we're equal, we've got equal pay. And that's just not the reality. I think we still have a lot more progress to make in terms of ensuring that women's place in society is not something that can be rolled back. It's very easy to grow up in the society we have now and think that this is how it's going to be forever and that there's no way anyone can take our rights away. And that's just not true. The economy that the Labour government inherited. I remember speaking to an MP not long ago who was saying that it was like a competition to see which department had the worst mess to sort out. I think I'm scared that they're going to spend so much time trying to unravel the mess that they inherited that they're not going to be able to make the progress that I would really like to see.
And finally, do you have any hope for the next generation? Do you think that next generation will view things differently to the generations gone before?
I think it depends on the day you ask me. I think in general, yes, with each generation, we get better at talking, we get better at approaching issues with more of a broader look at what we can do about something, and we're able to work collaboratively. But I am also fearful of statistics I'm seeing about the political leanings of the genders veering in opposite directions, and that worries me. But I also think that statistics can make the world seem a lot scarier than it actually is. And I think as long as the next generation is willing to talk to each other and is willing to work together, then hopefully we will build a better world.
Hopefully we will. And with that, we come to the end of another interview. So Hannah, it's good to hear you lift the lid on the damage of violence against women and girls, and it goes so much further than a bruised lip. It impacts self-esteem, ability to form healthy relationships, and maintain economic independence that everyone is entitled to. Thank you to the listeners of the podcast. If you have any questions, please feel free to comment. If you think it's worth coming back, please like and subscribe. If you feel that you need something to tide you over in the next podcast, please buy my book Party Games on Amazon. And on that note, I'll see you next time. Hope you have a good week, one and all.